Welcome to the Berkshires Gone By, history and folklore about the westernmost and most beautiful county in Massachusetts. I'm your host, Brooke. I'm going to start this show with a warning. Do not try this on yourself. Humans haven't always been great at curing what ails us, and when it comes to some things, we still struggle and fail. But it doesn't stop us from trying. And it didn't long ago, either. This story starts in a time before doctors washed their hands while working, when arsenic and mercury were used as antiseptics. And the few doctors who were trying to promote the idea of germ theory were openly ridiculed as crackpots. This was the time when William E. Brown became a child with a problem. You see, he had cancer. A tumor inside his mouth. An operation was performed to remove it, but with a little time, it came right back. And again, the boy had to undergo the knife. In an era before effective painkillers, numbing agents, and sedatives, his entire palate, the roof of his mouth, was cut away. This left him permanently disfigured. The upper palate is the support structure for much of the face. Without it, the facial features tend to sink inward. He'd have looked much like a person who was missing all their teeth, but not wearing dentures. That is, if he didn't grow a massive beard as soon as his hormones would allow, which he did. This episode in Medical Mayhem scarred William deeply. Not just physically, but psychologically as well. There wasn't a day that went by that he wasn't reminded of it when he spotted his reflection in the mirror, or the way a stranger on the street might glance at him. All of this inspired him to study dentistry. When he graduated, he began practicing in an office on Main Street, North Adams, in 1854, in the Fisher Block. But he had bigger plans in mind. He wanted to find a way to treat oral cancers without pain. He began to study all of the newest ideas on the subject. Along the way, William fell in love and married. Of their children, one son, Wallace, left school at the age of 12 to study under his father, and did small jobs around the office. He saved enough money to enroll in Bellevue Hospital Medical School in New York City. Partway through his education, he received a visit from his father. William needed Wallace to do something for him. William had been studying the use of corrosives in removing tumors. And you see, his own had come back. What choice did Wallace have? It took months, over and over, burning away the growth inside the elder Dr. Brown's mouth. But by the end, it was gone. It had worked. Now cancer-free and recovered, William packed up to return home. But so did Wallace. His father's new method had inspired him. Using corrosives to eat away things like surface tumors was not William's idea alone. Doctors had been playing at the idea for a while. But with practice, William had become very good at ensuring that the affected area was treated without damaging anything else, and his success rate was extraordinarily high when used on certain types of cancers. When they returned, he was able to secure funds, and he chose to keep his new idea in North Adams and make it the location of his greatest work. He'd open the Berkshire Hills Sanatorium in 1888, not to be confused with Sanitarium. A sanitarium is a health spa. A sanatorium is a real hospital for people with long-term or contagious illness that could benefit from round-the-clock care and sequestering from the general public, or, in the case of some disease, the public from them. It was located up on the hill at the corner of North and Vesey Streets, and began as a long row of tenement houses. Advertising, however, was key. At the time, there was a stigma around cancer. It was very hush-hush, and people were often too ashamed to even seek help from their own family doctors, for fear that word would get around. By placing advertisements in normal magazines that everyone read, like Harper's Bazaar, he could reach people who may otherwise been thinking that they were living with the secret that would eventually kill them. I, in fact, have one of these advertisements in front of me. It reads, "No new discovery can offer more hope in cases of cancer than exists today by our own method, without the use of the knife. The Berkshire Hills Sanatorium, the only institute in the world where cancer and tumors that are accessible can be permanently cured. Describe your case and we will mail the most complete information ever published on the subject of cancer and will give an opinion on what we can accomplish for you. Ask your family physician to investigate. He will be entertained as our guest. Doctors W. E. Brown and Son, North Adams, Mass." Suddenly, the hopeless began writing in droves, or simply showing up on the doorstep. The boom to the business was substantial. The advertisements began touting the location's ever-increasing size. It seemed that Dr. William E. Brown always needed more room for amenities. The 1900s census shows a large number of people in residence with him and his family. Not only his mother-in-law, but also a long list of patients he was treating at the time, of all ages. To accommodate those staying in the 40 guest rooms, by 1896, there were sun parlors on each of the 5 floors, offices, rooms for treatment, an observation tower to take in the beautiful views of the mountainous surroundings and the steeple city of North Adams. The building had electricity, which also ran the elevators and the intercom system. There was an in-house laundry. There were also 2 dining rooms, one for patients with bodily tumors, and another dining room for those patients with facial tumors, to save them any embarrassment. And to feed them all, there was a kitchen with a 30-foot-long cooking range. A massive array of additions and patient bungalows stretched up Vesey Street, turned and ran all the way along North Street to Williams, and turned down Williams, south again, creating a horseshoe shape. The treatment techniques used were non-surgical and non-radiative. In fact, both Dr. Browns dismissed radiation and X-ray use for treating cancer, since it was known that radiation could cause cancerous growths. William retired in 1905 and would pass away in 1908, leaving the running of the sanatorium to Wallace. In 1905, Wallace also became president of the North Berkshire Medical Society. Wallace learned much from his new acquaintances in the North Berkshire Medical Society, but still held fast to his father's methods, after seeing firsthand how they'd cured him during his visit to New York. He had his share of naysayers, but was very open about his practices. He held numerous tours of his establishment, and at the bottom of his advertisements even noted that if a potential client were still unsure, that they ought to send their own doctor to look over the sanatorium, that the visiting physician would be given free accommodations for the length of his visit and investigation. Dr. Brown had begun using the corrosives potassium hydrate and zinc chloride on skin and mucous membranes, such as up the nose. In the mouth and throat, he began using chromic and carbonic acid. Using a corrosive, called the escharotic method, to kill cancer cells does to a small extent work. Using corrosives to kill any cells absolutely works. Corrosives are just like that. They eat away at anything. In cases of very surface-level growths, such as cancers of the skin, it is in some cases still used today. And yes, it is for the most part painless, because the corrosive also kills nerve endings. So indeed, Dr. Brown did, in fact, cure people painlessly. And that's better than nothing. However, they thought that their initial success in surface-level cancers meant that they could take on bigger cases involving deeper tumors. It was already known that cutting out such tumors, in many cases, only bought people a little time, as often that patient simply waited too long to seek help, and the cancer had probably already spread before the initial tumor was able to be removed. People would often wait too long because going under the knife was, of course, painful and scary. Infections commonly set in. If you didn't die from the cancer, you might die from that. So it wasn't completely Dr. Wallace Brown's choice to take on larger cases. It was the public's. After seeing the ads for the sanatorium and the painless tumor removal, they'd write to him or travel all the way there and ask if he'd make an exception for their more severe case of the disease. Was he just supposed to turn them away? To not even try? So he'd admit them and give it his best shot. But the deeper cancers left bigger open wounds, as the corrosives would have to eat away more to get all of the tumor. And then, those wounds would have to be closed through surgery. Thus, the method was no longer painless. In addition, the larger, deeper tumors were harder to discern. It was more difficult to figure out how big it was, so after all the treatments were done and the patient was patched back up, the cancer often came back within a year or two, and metastasized. Because of this, other doctors criticized his work. However, Wallace made a discovery that went unrecognized in his paper entitled 25 Years Experience in the Treatment of Malignant New Growths with Steroids. He said that more research should be done into the spread of cancer, that he thought the spread might be through lymph nodes. He stated that the corrosives completely occluded all lymph vessels, which in my opinion are the main channels for the dissemination of cancer. He was right, and this was in fact a huge revelation. But it would go unnoticed until, in the 1930s, when it would be rediscovered at the University of Wisconsin by a man who'd never even heard of Dr. Brown. When it became clear through more scientific research into radiation that there was hope in that avenue, Dr. Brown's means of treatment seemed more and more old-fashioned, and for the most part, ineffective. Against most cancers, that was true. But not against some. He was indeed saving people. But despite this, he was convinced by others in the field to stop advertising. Besides, it was seen as crude for a doctor to advertise his services. There were not enough people in the area who were suffering from the disease, and word of mouth didn't spread far enough to keep the establishment afloat. Without advertising, people just didn't talk about that sort of thing openly. Within a year, the building was empty. But Wallace wasn't done. While the sanatorium sat closed, he ran for mayor of North Adams, and won, serving as the 9th mayor of the city from 1913, 1914, and 1915. The sanatorium sat empty until it was used as an emergency clinic during the Great Influenza epidemic near the end of World War I in 1918. Then, in 1920, the bank seized ownership of the property, and Wallace was forced to file the business for bankruptcy. Just under a year later, the great ornate structure was razed to the ground. During its heyday, it was the largest privately owned cancer treatment hospital in the U.S. Wallace would retire and move with his wife, Teresa, to live with his family in Blackenton Village. He'd die on April 4th of 1930 of a cerebral hemorrhage while he was off seeing his son in Laramie, Colorado. The North Adams Transcript published a short blurb on the 5th that read, Dr. W.E. Brown, ex-mayor, dies in Colorado hospital. End comes as a shock to North Adams' friends. Had gone west only a month ago. 8 times candidate for mayor, and successful 3 times. For many years conducted former Berkshire Hills Sanatorium for non-surgical treatment of cancer. He was brought back home and buried in the Hillside Cemetery in North Adams, like his father. But no stone can be found. Doctors William and Wallace Brown were by no means quacks. Their methods were cutting-edge and innovative for the time. They really did want only the best for their patients. In many cases of surface-level cancers that could be reached by the corrosives, they did indeed save lives, including Dr. William Brown's own. And the sanatorium may well have continued for a great deal longer if they'd stuck to those types of cancers. but by trying to treat people with other harder-to-reach forms of cancers, or cancers in people who'd simply waited too long, their failure rate increased. But Dr. Brown's techniques are still used for some cancers today. A word of warning again. Do not try this on yourself. If you have any suspicious lumps or bumps, if you're concerned about your health, please seek treatment from a licensed medical professional. This has been The Berkshires Gone By. Created, written, directed, and read by myself, Brooke Grenier, and co-produced by Deanna Garner. If you'd like to contact us, find more episodes, or see images relating to our topics, visit our Facebook page or our website at www.theberkshiresgoneby.com. You can also email us directly at theberkshiresgoneby, all one word, at gmail.com. We hope you'll join us for our next episode. Thanks for listening.